Hey everybody! If you've seen any of my previous videos, you know that I usually don't like to talk a lot about the music I'm about to play, but this particular project had so many firsts, not just for me, but I think for the creative string world, that I wanted to give you a quick primer on what you're about to hear and see. A couple of years ago, I started to experiment and go beyond just kind of being a jazz cello player uh, with these one-man solo live electronics and looping shows. And these shows have been attended by literally dozens of people since. During these shows, I've been trying to transcend the kind of cliched one-man band style looping and using effects just to imitate other instruments like a guitar or a synth, and really try to figure out what could the cello of the future actually sound like. And over the past couple of months, I had the chance to really hone and refine some of those ideas with 5 fellows chosen from all over the world as participants for the first String Tech seminar, which I was able to teach and lead. And for the final project, one of the cool things we did was a little musical game I proposed, where each participant was given one beat created by beatmaster Dave Dizzle and asked to create their own improvisation using different elements of sound design and looping and all of the cool concepts that they learned throughout the seminar. And to spice things up even more, I asked the participants to limit their improvisations to just 1 Instagram-friendly minute or less. Predictably, the students wound up referring to this final assignment as institutes. And I was so personally inspired by the performances that the fellows came up with that I decided to take the challenge myself, going into the legendary St. Rogue Studios in Venice, California, with a single camera person and improvising in real time over all 5 of these different beats, which range in style from neo-soul to old-school hip-hop to modern-day math rock. So, what can just 1 cellist with 1 cameraman in 1 room improvise in just 1 minute or less? Well, you're about to find out. But first, I gotta thank my sponsors, Yamaha and Ableton. And most importantly, I want to give a huge shout out to all of you Patreon supporters who have been helping me create and innovate for all of these months without having to worry about likes and views and just do the music that I'm passionate about. Thank you guys from the bottom of my heart. And for those creative string players out there, be sure to stick around after the performances for an in-depth look at how I actually approached getting the sounds I'm getting and looping as an improviser as opposed to just having a bunch of pre-planned things happening in a composition. This is going to be some invaluable information that you won't find being shared by any other creative string player online. So, without further ado, 5 Institutes. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed the performances. And now, as promised, I want to take you into my process to give you some real tips, tricks, and tactics, and most importantly, principles that you can apply to your own creative exploration. First, we're going to start with giving you an overview of the rig that I'm using, not so that you can copy it or get the same gear I have, but to give you some insights into why I chose what I chose and how that affects my performing. I'll take you through each piece to show you examples of each of these ideas in performance, while also touching on sound design and some of the unique looping concepts I use to keep things fresh and spontaneous in my performance, and hopefully to avoid some of the pitfalls that a lot of loopers fall into. And finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about something that I never hear other cellists bring up, but that I think is incredibly important, and that is pedaling technique. These are core foundational principles that you can use no matter what kind of rig you're using and no matter what your current setup is to get the most out of your creativity on stage and to have that all available to you in a way that's intuitive and comfortable. So be sure to stick around for that at the very end. And without further ado, let's start with gear. A lot of the effects and looping techniques I'm using would not be possible without having the complete isolation that only a solid body instrument provides. And that's why it was huge for me to have my Yamaha SVC 110 for this project. Now, I am a Yamaha artist and very proud of it, but I think I can safely say, having tried everything on the market, that the Yamahas truly have the market cornered when it comes to feel and playability that matches an acoustic instrument. And because I spend so much time on my acoustic cello, being able to just pick up the Yamaha and get all of the benefits of the isolation of a solid body instrument that sounds a lot like a real cello, with the feel and playability that Yamaha provides, was a huge, huge benefit. Next, I used a Launchpad XL for my pad work and mixing. This unit is extremely durable, really affordable. It's laid out a lot like a mixer with pads that allow me to do basic muting and clip launching in a no-nonsense, easy to control and easy to keep track of way. I love having the basic visual layout of what's going on with my loops and different tracks without having to constantly look at a laptop, which usually breaks my concentration and definitely breaks your connection with an audience. And finally, on the hardware side, we have my 2 foot controllers, which I've talked a lot about in previous videos, like my cello pedal board build. But very briefly, I'm using on my blind side the Morningstar MC6 Mark II. And I call it my blind side because as cellists, we can't really look over very easily on our left side with the instrument in the way. So on my left side, controlling my effects, in this case, I'm using a controller that I can keep my foot in the same place for a lot of the time. You see, the MC6 Mark II allows you to trigger one effect or send one MIDI message. Again, I'm using it to change sounds by pressing down, and then pressing the same switch. You can double tap to send another effect or create another effect change, and then you can hold and double tap and hold. In other words, I can easily, without moving my foot to the next switch, have 4 effects keeping my foot in the same place. Now this is massive, again, for my blind side, because I can have a slate of effects and sounds that I'm really comfortable with triggering, knowing where they are, and keep motion to a minimum, which is awesome. You'll notice in the videos that I almost never look on my left side, and I don't have to. I know where those sounds are. Also notice with the angle of the Morning Star, I'm never having to lift my heel, which creates a whole lot of instability with our cello playing. And the reason for that is I'm using my brand new invention, which is a piece of hardware called the cello pedal. This piece of hardware, which you can learn more about at thecellopedal.com, and which is now available for pre-order if you want one for your very own, allows you to take any controller or standard pedal that you use a lot and bring it to a very ergonomic angle so that you don't have to raise your heel when stomping around. Again, this is huge because it allows you to maintain control of your instrument and be able to play in the most ergonomic, comfortable way with these types, or really any type of pedal. On the right-hand side, we have the Keith McMillan Soft Step, which I love because it's so incredibly thin, again, meaning that I don't have to lift my foot very much. But one of the other benefits to the Keith McMillan is the big lights for each particular patch. And this is why I tend to keep my soft step on my right-hand side when I'm doing these types of shows. And I'll assign whatever is new and unique to that particular track or that particular tune to the soft step so that I can really see everything that's going on. It's the secret weapon I use to control whatever's new and variable, whether it be focusing on different harmonizers or controlling a whole bunch of loops that I need to be hands-free with. The Macmillan also allows for pressure-sensitive pads, which allows me to do things like volume swells or wah, again, without having to move my foot onto a treadle and move around, thereby lifting my knee and causing problems. In a nutshell, this hardware, along with a lot of practice, has allowed me to create a rig where I can be really creative about changing sounds and changing loops and doing multiple things at the same time on the fly, the way a drummer, a piano player, or an organ player would. For software, I'm using Helix. And if you'd like to learn more about the effects and what sounds I was using, or how I set them up in terms of routing and EQ and pedal order, we're making the complete library of Helix patches available on Patreon, and we might release them for Pickup Test subscribers as well. I think this is the first time a library like this for electric cellists in these contemporary styles has ever been created, and I'm so excited to be sharing it with all of you guys. Hopefully it'll be a cool foundation for your own study and developing your own signature tones. And then, of course, Ableton Live for looping. While there are some really impressive hardware loopers out there, I don't know of anything that has the capability of really utilizing some of the looping techniques we're going to be discussing as I describe what's going on in these videos. I'm also an Ableton artist, proudly, and I really do think that they're still the only game in town when it comes to really creative loop work. Also, quick disclaimer before we start, our videographer Ira brought beautiful handheld and another camera on a tripod and a couple of GoPros to catch the different things with the hands and feet, but neither of us knew what was going to happen that day, so we might not have caught all the angles in each performance. Bear with me. I think there's enough for you guys to understand what's going on here. I named the first etude back in the day in honor of the old school style beat that Dave was laying down here. And the two things I wanted to highlight in this improvisation was the use of a sustainer, sometimes called a freeze style effect, and also my use of beat dropping. So a sustainer is simply an effect that takes the tail of whatever note you played and stretches it for a length that you determine. So as you can see at the beginning of the tune, I'm holding that low B, and then while that's going, I hold a high E going into the next bar to complete a voicing of a C9 chord that normally wouldn't be possible on the instrument. Also, quick shout out to Moses Jordan, my admin, who did an amazing job transcribing all of these improvisations. This effect can often sound really contrived or annoying when it becomes too obvious to the listener. So one of the things that I always strive to do when using this type of effect is to be really subtle about it. I like to think of it as a way to just subtly extend notes or to subtly extend the resonance of chords the same way a pianist or guitarist would, so that I can get more complicated stacks of harmonies going at the same time. Here, sustaining the second group of notes to get an F sharp minor 11 chord. And a couple of ways you can avoid that super obvious sounding thing, unless you want that, is to create some subtle modulation in the sound. And Helix allows you to do that within the freeze effect itself. But if you have other effects pedals, that's a possibility as well. And also to consider, if you can do it on your freeze, to set a nice, smooth, and reasonably long release time so that you don't have to keep the pedal pressed down to the bitter end. That frees me up to be able to start thinking about loops and other things that my foot needs to do. So giving myself that extra time after I release the pedal is really important, and I almost always have that setting dialed in. Even though I'm not creating my own loops in this particular track, I am using Dave's beat, and that creates a lot of the same problems that every looping artist has, which is how do you get the same repeating 8-bar, 16-bar, 4-bar phrase to not sound monotonous. For this first etude, I used one of the simplest approaches to this, which is simply programming a mute switch both on my Macmillan and on my Launchpad, so that I can easily mute the track, sometimes 2 beats before the next downbeat. Here, muting the track with pedal 2 on the soft step, and re-triggering with channel 7 on the Launchpad. Sometimes cutting it out for a bar or two, and then restarting it, which allows me to slip in an occasional odd meter, an extra 2/4 bar or something like that. Muting, and unmuting and going right to the sustain pedal, and relaunching with the foot. It's this idea of simply stopping and restarting the track, or muting and unmuting the track, that allows me to get just a little bit more variety, dropping the beat back in. It's a simple technique, but really important, and something that you can plan your rig design around. A lot of the time with really critical functions like this, I will program some redundancy between my pads and, in this case, the soft step, where I have a mute, a launch, and a kill-all button at the last track of the Launchpad and also the very end of my Keith Macmillan board. And this is because when I'm improvising, as opposed to just pre-scripting my performance, if my hands are free, I can use the Launchpad, but if they're not free, I can use my foot. Planned redundancy, really, really important for improvising in the moment. I titled the second piece Nico after Niccolò Paganini, because I was really going for that kind of classical meets hip-hop beat thing that's been done to death at this point. This piece features the same predictable stacked looping technique that we see in almost any looping performance. A 4-bar phrase, another 4-bar phrase, a third 4-bar phrase, and a fourth 4-bar phrase. I think the only thing that I would point out that's interesting here is, first of all, that I'm using my pedal, my soft step, to trigger each one of these scenes. I was automating Ableton to record one new track while pressing the playhead on the previous one, thereby triggering the old loop and starting a new one. So one of the huge benefits to this is because Ableton is always locked to a click, you can push a pedal anytime the bar before, and you'll start the loop perfectly right on the beat. Watch me do it again here to trigger the third loop, loop number 3, so I can get to my volume swells a little bit early. Also, take note of the volume swell wah technique that I used in the middle of the tune. One thing about this type of effect with the soft step, as I mentioned before, is the soft step's unique ability to be able to use expression type messages, in this case with a pressure sensitive pad. This allowed me to not have to get an old school volume/expression pedal and to do all of this work while keeping my heel on the ground. Much more comfortable. Also, notice that because this is a volume swell technique, the note actually has to be started before the base of the swell that we hear. So you'll probably notice that I'm playing all of these strums a little bit before you hear them. In other words, we have to start each note a little bit early and then swell it in with our foot. This is a very common technique for guitar players, organ players, synth players, a little more rare for string players. But once you get the hang of it, in this case, I'm usually starting, I think, like an 8th note early. It becomes second nature and can be a really fun part of your bag, not just for guitaristic effects like this, but for all kinds of other expressive sounds that you can achieve. Also notice at the end, my launch pad allowed me to easily mute tracks. That's the first 2. They're still running, just muted. And then to bring one and then the second one back in real time. This is another fun and easy technique that can take some of the monotony out of looping. I call the third improvisation Sad Robot for the tonal character of the Harmonizer that's really the featured sound of this jam. For those of you that know my playing, you know I use a lot of different approaches to harmony. But in this case, I wanted to drill down and feature a standard chromatic harmonizer, which most of you guys will have on your pedal board somewhere. And I'm using, in this case, a 3rd down, a 5th down, and a major 6th down, with each one programmed to pedal 1, 2, and 3 on my soft step. Also, just a quick note that because the soft step can send different MIDI messages with the directional pads or with pressure, you can actually get into some pretty wild stuff when it comes to harmonizing. Like, for example, using the bottom of the arrow to send a 6th down, but the top of the arrow to send a 6th up, or using the directional controls to alter the inversion of a certain quality of chord. It gets pretty wild and way beyond the scope of this video, but if you want to see those ideas taken to their extreme, you can check out my video of my original tune If, or my reharm of Imogen Heap's Hide and Seek. Over the years, I've developed an entire harmonic vocabulary with closed voicing chords that would normally not be possible on a standard tuned cello using these types of harmonies. Because this was just a 1-minute etude, I wanted to limit myself in my improvisation to just using these 3. But of course, any particular interval can spawn a whole group of new chord voicings for your cello, violin, or viola. And with time and a lot of practice, these can really become an integral part of your comping. In terms of pedal layout, I want to bring your attention to my use of momentary switching here, as opposed to latching. Now, a lot of the time, the effects pedals that we have are by default latching, which means when you click it down, the sound or effect is engaged, and then another click disengages that. Now the problem is that that's twice the amount of work we often want to do or have the time to do. And in a piece like this, where I'm constantly switching between two sounds, in this case my bowed sound versus my plucked sound, I want to be able to get even more efficient with things. So on my Morningstar, I had the bowed sound as the default, and then when I pushed the pedal down, while the pedal was pushed down, I went to one of my plucked tones. That allowed me to keep my foot in the same place and get a constant switch between the two of them. And I thought that was really cool. I actually took that to the next level with the delayed sound that you hear, where I pushed down my third switch, switch C, to be able to engage a much deeper, much slower delay, which you'll hear. It's about a half note delay, which gave me a really cool kind of echoing effect. And then releasing that went to a normal delay. All the harmonizer buttons on the soft step are also pressure sensitive. So here I'm going to play in thirds, dropping the beat, third, 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 with regular notes unharmonized in between. So I use those types of momentary as opposed to latching switches in any situation where I'm rapidly switching between effects. That allowed me to control all of my sounds easily and efficiently with the Morningstar, again, on my blind side, left foot, and freed me up to just mostly think about harmony stuff in my right foot with the soft step. I named the fourth etude Drunken Monkey Broken Beat in honor of the not-so-symmetrical phrase lengths of the loops that I created. This is another huge issue that I used to have with loopers and listening to other looping artists, is that so many, or so often I should say, they were stuck in 2-bar phrases, 4-bar phrases, and of course always usually in 4/4, which wasn't very cool for me because a lot of the playing I like to do and meters I like to improvise in are mixed. 4/4 is great, by the way, but it just seemed that the whole idea of looping was creatively stifling in that way. So one of the ways that I like to get around that is to actually set Ableton to a smaller meter, like 1/4, or in this case 2/4, and that allows me to sneak in a 6/4 bar or a 2/4 bar and create phrase lengths that are not completely obvious and cliched. Okay, so now I'm going to drop the beat with the launch pad, and because the looper sees things as 2/4, watch how I slip in an extra bar. 1, 2. Now starting the loop with my launch pad. I also wound up using a slightly more sophisticated version of the beat dropping techniques from the first etude, where I was simply removing drums from time to time to create more interest and variety. In this particular case, I wound up stopping the clip, but also pressing the drum mute button at the same time. There it is at the bottom of channel 7. A few beats later, I bring in and launch all of the other loops back with pedal 2 on the Keith McMillan. They don't start for a second because I've got a 2-bar rest in the loop. But that drum is still muted. And then you'll see me with my hand a millisecond later bringing in that drum loop again. So you get a cool kind of beat drop where other instruments come back and then the drum hits. Okay, let's check out that sequence one more time in slow-mo. So kill all and mute drums with the launch pad. Start with my loop. Everything comes in but the drums. Relaunch the drums. And now play my long note holding the sustainer pedal, so that keeps going while I can play the bass notes and get that nice long sustain. And you'll note with my layout on the Launchpad XL, I always have my clip launch, kill all right next to my drum track. So I can always use a diagonal 2-button push when setting up a technique like this. This is a great example of establishing a workflow, and if you're consistent in that with your improvisations when you're playing, eventually these techniques become more second nature and they can just happen as you feel them. The last piece is entitled Pop Math Rock, and this one really made me think of modern day bands like Polyphia or Covet, where there's this really cool tapping octave displacement thing going on. And for that, I decided to feature not only a more overdriven type sound for the lead, but also I wanted to feature a pitch bending type effect. Now, obviously, cellos, violins, violas, we are the master of pitch bends, right? No frets, that's built in. But I decided to take a slightly different approach in honor of this being a more electronic music, contemporary style type exercise. Particularly, I was thinking about a friend of mine who plays keyboards and is always complaining that his pitch mod wheel can never quite make his string samples sound natural. So what I decided to do is flip that on its head and actually make my cello sound like there's a pitch mod wheel going on. And in order to do that, I used pressure-sensitive triggers on the Keith McMillan for a whole step and an octave. Now, what's cool about this is that it can either go an octave up, and I set it to be a very fast rise and fall, or if you're holding down the pedal, engaging it, and then you play, and then release the pedal, you can also get the same intervallic action in the opposite direction. So notice it here in this sequence. I'll push the pedal down when my finger's on a B flat to make a fake C that resolved. Octave up, mute all. And finally redropping the beat with the Launchpad. From a looping perspective, I use the technique of ghost looping. Now, in this particular case, I actually contrived that I was going to play a 4-bar phrase and then that phrase would be muted the next 4 bars, but that I'd have it in my back pocket to bring in a little bit later in the tune. So in order to do that, I actually set up a 4-bar dummy clip, as it's known in the Ableton looping world, where for the first 4 bars of the main theme that you hear, I actually had that preset as a 4 bars of just blank space in Ableton. That allowed me to pre-program it to loop, stop, and then be muted until I brought that loop back in. So as we're going to see in this example, bar 5 through 8 are going to be created as a loop, but you're not going to hear them playing back immediately. Now at bar 9, I just keep going, but 5 through 8 are silently looping. Now it comes in over a new loop that's being created at bar 13. What I do in these performances really wouldn't be possible without spending a lot of time thinking about and developing principles for approaching the left and right foot. This isn't the kind of thing that any of us learn in conservatory class as cellists, but the truth is it took me a lot of trial and error to really create a rig that gave me full access to my creativity on stage. And so I want to save you guys years of time by sharing some of these ideas with you. When it comes to live looping, it's one thing to have all of the music written out or pre-scripted. In this case, a lot of your favorite one-man bands on YouTube can simply walk around their room and change instruments because everything whether it be changing the sounds or doing different things with different types of loops, have all been pre-scripted. In other words, the computer or software is pushing the pedals for them. But being able to change effects, manipulate sounds, and use different looping techniques spontaneously and improvisationally in real time requires a completely different approach. And as a cellist who usually has both of their hands full, I had to develop a four-limb approach to get around this problem. In other words, I've learned to utilize both of my feet as well as both of my hands as part of my musical instrument, treating my pads and controllers as an extension of my musicality, just like a drummer or organ player with their feet. In order to do this, I needed a very specific and thoughtful approach, from everything to gear choice, to how I laid out my pedals and my workflow, all the way to developing an efficient and comfortable pedaling technique that would allow the process to be ergonomic and to give me full access to my creativity on stage. So the first and most important principle I want to share with you guys is something I call fanning. And this just refers to the shape, windshield wiper type shape, that our foot makes when we're pivoting on our heel. The most fundamental principle for all of us as cellists has to be that if our feet move, the cello is going to move, and we're going to be less stable, less comfortable in performance, right? So the ability to be able to keep our heel grounded and thereby keeping our feet and the rest of our bodies really grounded is paramount. That's got to be a first principle. So a lot of the time when we're sitting in front of our pedal boards, we'll have our foot right below the pedals that we're about to press. Now, this is not an ideal position, because what this means is that now you're sliding or stepping your foot forward. And in both cases, that is much less comfortable and ergonomic than simply doing something like this. You can repeat this even if you don't have a pedal board in front of you right now, or if you're not holding a cello between your legs. And it's pretty obvious that not only is fanning a more stable approach to reaching your switches, but it also makes for a lot less movement, which means it's easier to keep track of where you are. And I always feel like a goal for me when I'm playing, particularly with my Morningstar, but also with the Keith McMillan as well, is to not have to look down all the time. In other words, just like we play our instrument without using tapes, if we have techniques and pedaling techniques that keep us stable and grounded, we should be able over time to learn the feel of where whatever sounds in our head are in our feet. And that's an awesome goal to shoot for if you really want to achieve any level of spontaneity and freedom while using this type of gear. And this leads really smoothly into my next principle, which is rest position. You've probably seen young Suzuki violinists or cellists, they really emphasize what does rest position look like. And it's important, right? It's just like the space in between the notes is important. How we anticipate and set ourselves up for success, in this particular case, the ability to use this fanning technique instead of moving or lifting our feet is key. So you'll notice that with the Keith McMillan, I tend to leave my foot between the two main pedals that I'm going to use. So I'm not actually pushing either of them down, but what I can do from there is I can go from here to here relatively easily. Now this is really cool once you add the cello, because instead of trying to do this, which is again moving the instrument and causing all kinds of problems, it's a lot more comfortable to do this. And by resting in between the pedals, I know where I am. So most of the time I'm pedaling 1 and 2 because those are the most ergonomic. So I usually place the effects that I'm going to be using the most and featuring the most in those spots. And by keeping my foot in the middle, that allows me again to move from side to side, staying on my heel. And with the Morning Star, very much the same deal, right? I have my foot gently between the two of them. In other words, with my toes pointed straight out from the knee. That's where I orient my pedal board and my controllers so that that's exactly dead center where rest position is. That way, if I'm going to reach for another pedal, I know what tweaking my heels feels like, right, from the ankle, and I also know what feels straight and natural again. And that gives me yet another reference point that I can return to and reset to when I'm going back to the pedals or switches that I use the most. Again, the goal here is to have as many points of reference so that we're able to really feel where we are down there easily and naturally without having to look very much. And this also falls in line with a universal principle that we probably all know from our cello teachers and working with our instruments, that we want to have our gear, in this case, our switches and our controllers, fit our bodies, right, instead of trying to change our bodies to fit our instruments. That is always a losing proposition, right? And this leads to the third principle, which is 2 points of contact. In order to feel comfortable and stable doing anything, we need to have at least 2 points of contact with whatever we're interfacing with. So in the same way, a unicycle is a lot less stable than a bicycle because we have 2 wheels on the ground, or when we shift, having at least 2 fingers, right, or a finger and another part of our body touching the cello is what really allows us to keep track of where we are in space. The same thing is true with our feet, right? So a lot of the time, again, with the switches that I'm using the most, I'm going to have my foot in rest position and gently touching, or at least being able to feel where both of those switches are. So you'll notice a lot of the time I kind of have a good awareness of where this guy is and where this guy is. And then when I want to use it, I just move over again, tilting on my heel, pivoting on my heel, much easier than picking up my foot. Now this is really cool once you add the cello, because instead of trying to do this, which is again moving the instrument and causing all kinds of problems, it's a lot more comfortable to do this. And by resting in between the pedals, I know where I am. I have 2 points of contact, right? Or I can fan out my foot a little bit, and now I'm between these two. That really allows me to orient myself in space, right? Because now I have 2 points of contact. Even if I'm going to do a quick jump to a different switch, knowing exactly where my foot is and being able to come back to that and feel that and remember that is really, really key for me. Last but not least, if you're in need of a lot of switches during your performance, you use 50 effects in one song, or you've got 30 loops going. If you need to reach a higher part of your pedal, make sure that instead of lifting your heel, which again causes you to lose your place, lose your reference points, instead try the technique of keeping your heel on the ground and lifting your foot as little as possible to reach that next point, and practice that movement over and over again. You may notice this requires engaging your core a little bit, right? But it's a heck of a lot less work and a lot easier to maintain your feeling of where you are in space with that heel down. Slightly unique movement that many of you guys have probably never tried, or certainly never practiced in the context of your cello playing, but a very, very valuable one. Well, guys, if you've made it this far in the video, you probably know that content like this isn't available anywhere else on the internet. And you're probably aware of all of the firsts for creative string playing that you got to see in this video. So if you want to support that, and I hope you do, you can join my Patreon for as little as $1 a month. But it's not just support to my music and the artists that help me make it. You'll get swag like t-shirts and stickers. You'll get access to free sheet music. And To celebrate this particular release, my amazing admin Moses has transcribed all of the improvisations, and we're going to be making the sheet music available to you along with the Dave's beats and the Helix pack of preset effects, all free for Patreon subscribers. So again, I'm committed to giving you an insane amount of value for helping me create this music. Thanks again, and just a quick reminder that I release a new video single for my latest project every first Friday of the month. So hope you can come back for the next one.